This man has changed devil fruits forever, although arguably he's more brain now than man. In fact, he's also probably much more tongue than man. I hope that Vegapunk, or one of them, explains how he mimicked the pawpaw fruit after Kuma shows up to save everyone. This is definitely incoming. Oda has heavily hinted that Mr. Dr. Vegapunk is going to be the character to explain in excruciating detail exactly how devil fruits work. And like any good science teacher, Vegapunk will have a class experiment to reference, being the Seraphim, although why should we stop at Kuma? With this knowledge, Vegapunk almost certainly imbued devil fruit powers into all of the other Seraphim as well, which leads us to a very important question. Seraphim Boa has to have a different devil fruit, right? Like, they're not going to give a child the lust-based fruit, surely. That is very true. Although it would be a great way for Oda to add himself to the ever-growing mangaka wall of shame in this particular area. What I would propose is that S-Snake could have the same fruit ability, but have it produce a different effect. The Mera Mera onomatopoeia means to overcome with emotion, and in Hancock's case, that just happens to be love, although more practically, it's lust. Love at first sight isn't really a thing, however, lust at first sight, now that's a thing. Which is euphemistically encaptured by all of Hancock's victims instantly becoming rock hard, which certainly isn't helping the case for S-Snake at the moment, but consider this. Depending on how the fruit works, it could just take the strongest emotion generated by the user and amplify it. So in the case of S-Snake, maybe it does a similar thing, but it's because, she's so adorable instead of the Hancock alternative. This is something I've speculated on once before in regards to Blackbeard actually. He was after Boa Hancock's devil fruit, and the question as to why is quite puzzling, because nobody in his crew could really make decent use of it, given their results in the aesthetic lottery of life. So the idea would be that if Blackbeard did have it, then the emotion amplified would be discussed or something along those lines. But regardless of whether he actually used it or not, Vegapunk should have the code for Boa Hancock's devil fruit. And for the sheer fun of it, I would love to see that power in the hands of one of the other Seraphim. Speaking of, something I didn't touch on is that we were given the names of the Seraphim here being S-Bear, S-Snake, S-Hawk, and S-Shark, which would imply that the Seraphim only consist of the original 7 warlords, because they were all specifically crafted by Oda to have this fun animal motif. The warlords who joined afterwards kind of break that motif because they just have no respect for the system. I mean, yes, Blackbeard has been designated as a grand hippopotamus, and Law is a snow leopard, apparently, but it doesn't really fit in with the OG scheme. So I would imagine that that means there is an S-Flamingo, S-Gecko, and S-Crocodile currently somewhere out there in the world. Probably not on Egghead Island though, otherwise they'd likely have been released to fight against CP0. The one that I would be most interested to see right now is Crocodile, because again, if Vegapunk was able to clone him, then he would have the genetic code for the Suna Suna no Mi, which is our final fruit-based barrier. If Vegapunk can create Logia powers, then nothing is off the table in this world. It's all very much, in fact, on the table, because it's a very big table. And then there's the question of S-Hawk. As far as we're aware, Mihawk is not a fruit user, so just like Jinbei, Vegapunk would have had to get creative with assigning him a power. And one of the better fruits for use would likely be Mr. 1 Super Super no Mi, thus turning him into a literal world's greatest sword man. Plus, Dar's Bones was imprisoned in Impel Down, so it's reasonable to assume that Vegapunk may have performed whatever examination on him that he likely did with Senor Pink after he was caught. I don't know what kind of examination that was, but I have to imagine that it was pretty damn hard-boiled. But also, by now, Vegapunk would have a whole library of Devil Fruit codes. At this point, I would go so far as to assume that if a Devil Fruit user has been caught by the Marines, then their power has been registered into Vegapunk's system. Who are these two mysterious shadowed scientists in the cover story? I don't know if it's just me, but they don't seem to me like Caesar and Judge. So I actually got quite a few comments about these guys, and this happens every time Oda draws a silhouette in the story, and it's actually a genuine question. Because at first, I thought that it was obviously Caesar and Judge, as the figure on the left has a very similar hairstyle to Caesar's, Caesar's fashion choice in the Punk Hazard flashback, but then I realized that this figure is missing Caesar's horns. And that's a pretty big detail to overlook, because even in the flashback, they were huge. So I now think that these silhouettes are likely to be two new sciencing men who were part of MADS. Not to skip over Caesar though, because him being part of MADS was not at all common knowledge, and a lot of readers probably only encountered that particular bombshell in this chapter. It's been known to us for a while because it was practically confirmed via Caesar's Viviacard databook entry, but this is the first time to my knowledge that he has been directly connected to the MADS name, and it makes me so much more curious about this group. It's like the science equivalent of the Rocks Pirates, because I have the same question with both of those groups, which is what causes a pretty decent dude guy like, say, your Whitebeards and your Vegapunks to join a group infested with these villainous bungle nuts like, say, your Kaidos and your Queenses. When Vegapunk represents Tesla, do you think the pigeon is foreshadowing for Vegapunk's death? death. Alright, so this comment probably doesn't make a lot of sense to you at first, but stick with me. Because I didn't know this, but apparently Nikola Tesla was like absolutely obsessed with pigeons. To the point where he, and I quote, met a very special pigeon and loved it as a man loves a woman. Incidentally, Tesla was a lifelong bachelor in a twist that will come as no surprise to anyone. However, this is relevant because the Vegapunk character is quite heavily inspired by Tesla, as his dream was to create a source of inexhaustible clean energy. Whenever he wasn't thinking about pigeons, that is, which to be clear, was often, too often. So look, it could be a particularly bad omen that a man with a pigeon has shown up to kill Vegapunk, as apparently after his favorite pigeon died, Tesla knew that his life's work was over. It would be pretty funny if Oda chose Lucci to be Vegapunk's assassin, knowing all of this pigeon-based background with Tesla. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he did, because Oda is almost like Vegapunk himself. He takes in and stores all sorts of information at a frankly inhuman rate, and he chooses to apply the sum of all human knowledge to fictional pirates, which I greatly appreciate. But of course, all of this pigeon business could just be your classic avian coincidence as well. I wasn't expecting Atlas to be mechanical. Does that mean Lilith, York, and the Seraphim are also just lifelike androids? So I suspect that the Seraphim are far more advanced than the Vegapunk clones. The Seraphim seem to me like lab-grown bioengineered existences, whereas the Vegapunks are more similar to androids. The thing is that the Vega clones were constructed a long time ago, before Vegapunk had the technology, understanding, and/or resources required to create the Seraphim, perhaps even before the Pacifista. So in a way, the various punks are potentially very early steps in what would ultimately become the Pacifista and then the Seraphim. However, that does leave me with the question of York. If the Vegapunks are all artificial, just with aspects of the original Vegapunk's mind, then why do they need an outlet for human desires at all? Is it just a thing where Vegapunk's initially human mind is creating these phantom urges, mimicking the experience of a human within the artificial bodies? Because, to be fair, that probably makes a lot more sense than the alternative, which is that some of the punks are biological existences that have their needs satisfied by an entirely separate biological existence. Hey, you don't like steak fat? But it adds so much flavor. Look, it's not about the flavor, it's about the texture. I often find that steak fat is just like too chewy, and after a while my mouth just gets really bored of attempting to consume it, so I just try to pick the less fatty cuts. Honestly, I think Robin should be the one to fight Lucci. They're a more even matchup, and Robin deserves some revenge for Water 7. What I want, and have wanted with Robin for quite some time, is for her to learn the Rokushiki techniques. Robin's Devil Fruit is uniquely positioned to take advantage of most of the 6 powers. Because just imagine spawning 200 arms and being able to flood an opponent with a tsunami of Shigun, or creating a ton of legs and having them all use Rankyaku. All of which is to say that no, I don't think that Robin will fight against Lucci. She has no haki, no Rokushiki, it all just seems like a bad idea. He's a big cat, she's a big not that. But then again, none of that stopped her beating Black Maria, so you never know. I don't know if someone else typed this, but I have a high suspicion that Lucci might have Conqueror's haki after the 2-year time skip. Out of everyone in CP0, he's the one who's most likely to get it, considering how he acted in any slobby. I feel like of all of the major antagonists in One Piece, Lucci is actually the least likely to have Conqueror's haki, because he's not a natural king or really even a leader. I mean, he's instantly willing to bend the knee and probably other body parts for anyone who is willing to give him a license and purpose to kill. I mean, the cat dude was even content to serve under Spandam. I'll say that again, Spandam. And I just can't see a world where someone who took orders from the aforementioned Spandam is going to become one of the chosen magical kings of the planet. I unironically think that even Don Krieg would have a better chance, because at least he had the mindset of a leader and a conqueror. It's just too bad that he had the moveset of a pile of manure clad in golden armor, which really does go to prove the whole polishing a turd saying. Thoughts about Kaku mentioning that the hologram attacking them was from, quote, space. Could be gearing up for something astronomical. Okay, so this moment is actually massive, and for whatever reason, no one's talking about it. But in this chapter, Kaku startlingly casually confirms that space travel is more widespreadly known than we thought, because he encounters the space monster hologram and he says, "I've always wanted to fight one of these. It's not meant to be down on this sea," implying that people have not only traveled into space, which we did already know, but we didn't know that anyone in the world knew. So how does Kaku know about the space monsters? Where were these journeys published? Thinking about it, Vegapunk himself potentially traveled into space many years ago. He probably even brought back some of the automata to Karakuri Island, which would go on to be repowered and become Lieutenant Spacey in his group. who ended up then traveling back up to the moon and discovered the rest of their kind. That or it was someone else who brought the automata back, and that's how the world seems to have some knowledge of alien life. That or Kaku is just a wild conspiracy theorist. But this could be a really fun setup though with the whole hologram thing, because if the crew do go into space, then they could encounter the same monster and just sort of brushed off as a hologram. But then it isn't. It is a not hologram. And one of many potential resolutions to Egghead Island could be for the Vegapunks to augment the Thousand Sunny and turn it into a rocket ship to escape. Because if it were ever to happen, then the timing right now seems right. We're on a future island with a gaggle of genius robots, so let's just do it. And by it, I mean this next video because it's even better than this one was, so I look forward to seeing you there.